Madam President, you know as well as I do what's happening in our home state of Illinois when it comes to the migrants that are being bused from Texas primarily into our state, the impact it's had in the state and in the city of Chicago in particular. These migrants are arriving in the city without any consultation or warning, and are being dumped in places near the city, totally unprepared to face the cruelty of the winter that we're facing in Chicago. I'm amazed at the number of people who have shown extraordinary caring and stepped forward to try to help. I think Catholic Charities, Salvation Army, there are so many groups. There's a New Life Covenant Church, Matthew DiMatteo, extraordinary, just a miracle worker. He manages to find a way to put a roof over the heads of those migrants who come to our city and give them a fighting chance to have a decent life. So many more just like them, prepared to step up and provide shelter, provide basic clothing, food, accessibility to schools, and more. I really want to commend the mayor as well. Brandon Johnson has taken an approach toward this which I think is humane and consistent with the traditions of America. He shows a caring heart time and again, and I respect him so much for it. Recently, the city of Chicago tried to put some order into this disorderly process, identifying times and places where the buses could stop so that people could be received properly, cared for, and go about their lives as best they could. But unfortunately, there's only been one example of cooperation by the state of Texas. There are plenty of examples the other way. People that are sent to airports in Rockford, where they're dumped out of airplanes on tarmac with no place to turn. People who are put in suburban towns and rural areas, which even if they wanted to help, would be so limited in what they could do. We understand the politics of the situation better than most. We do politics for a living. But there are a lot of people who are helpless and victims of this situation who need to be taken into consideration. The city of Chicago gave the Texas governor a safe, convenient, accessible option to drop the migrants off in a warm shelter for orderly processing. But only one bus from Texas has even attempted to register with the city. The Texas governor has chosen cruelty and chaos over orderly and humane processing. I don't understand the politics of that moment. These people are as vulnerable as any people on earth. They're doing the best they can for themselves, and they're in a situation where they need a helping hand in many instances. Last week, my colleagues in the Senate were working to negotiate a border compromise to deal with policy and law on the border. I support that completely. I don't know what the final product will be, and I hope I can support the bill, but this process was long, long overdue. I've made immigration one of the issues of concern during my service in the Senate. I was the original author of the DREAM Act. I was part of the Gang of 8 10 years ago that passed legislation, bipartisan legislation, on the floor of the United States Senate. I believe that it's important, it's inevitable, that we deal with this in a humane and thoughtful way. Now let me say a word about what's going on at the border. I believe in the asylum process. If you're a student of history, you know that during World War II, the United States had a policy of turning away refugees. There's the well-publicized and notorious example of the SS St. Louis, a ship which came from Europe and tried to find a port to disembark in Havana and in Florida and failed. And the passengers were returned to Europe, some 700 of them, many of whom died in the Holocaust. There were Jewish people looking for a safe place in the world where they could live, and we turned them away in World War II. That's a fact. But at the end of the war, we decided there would be a different approach in the future. We would have an orderly international process led by the United States when it came to refugees. And we established that and lived with it under presidents of both political parties for decades. The situation we face at the border today defies what I just described to you. Desperate people in numbers that we could handle coming into the United States through an asylum process. What we're facing now is just not comparable at all. The thousands and thousands of people who are turning up at our borders each day are unsustainable. There was a story in the New York Times this morning about the number of immigrants who are coming to our southern Mexican border from Africa. And they told the story about a group of people from Guinea in Africa who found a way to travel from Guinea to Turkey, then to fly from Turkey to Colombia, then from Colombia to Honduras, and then to Nicaragua, where they were transported to the border. This defies our stereotype in our mind about where a refugee is coming from in Central America. In this last year, more than 10,000 people from Uzbekistan showed up at our southern border in Mexico. How do you explain this? Well, one explanation is pretty obvious. We have a refugee crisis in this world, the likes of which we've never seen. There are numbers all over the world, hundreds of thousands of people who are desperately looking. Today, there are over 100 million displaced people worldwide, including over 30 million refugees. It's the largest refugee crisis in history. That's the starting point of this conversation. But the second point is equally important. Many of these people have found their way to the United States through international groups, some of them with very sinister purposes, who are trying to make a lot of money on helpless people by promising they can get to the United States and have a much better life. These people are being exploited in Africa, in Asia, and around the world, and we have to deal with this seriously. They are not the ordinary course of refugees coming to the United States. They are overwhelming numbers that has completely bankrupted our system in its response. I hope this bipartisan group finds a way to deal with it and to resolve it in a humane fashion, and I'm open to that suggestion. In the meantime, I want to commend the people in my state, the mayor and others, who are stepping up to do their very best to be humane and American in their response. Many of us can trace our own immigrant roots back one generation or two. I'm certainly one of those. My mother was an immigrant to this country. I've met with these immigrants all over the world and all over the United States, and I've talked to them. And although I say to them, the situation at our border is not sustainable, it has to change, and we can't deal with the massive numbers that come our way, I look at each one of them and see in their eyes, the eyes of my own family, making that decision to come here, desperately trying to get to the United States. It's a natural human instinct. But we need an orderly process. The bill that we passed, the Comprehensive Immigration Reform, established such a process. We took the 11 million people undocumented in the administration, in the nation, and we said to them, step forward, identify yourself, register yourself, pay your taxes, and go on working. And realize that at a future time, many, many years from now, you may be eligible for legal status and even citizenship. That was part of the promise. And we need to establish such an approach today to find a way to deal with those who are here and those who want to stay here and are no danger to the United States. The fact is we cannot absorb all the people in the world who want to come to the United States at this moment. It's just not practical, and it's not humane to even think in those terms. But those who are here should be brought in and assimilated into this country. If they're here legally and no danger to our country, they can be an important part of our future. We need them in so many different ways. You and I, Madam President, know the agricultural community in our own state. They come to us desperate. These are conservative individuals, politically, who see the reality that our workforce is not adequate for our economy, and the birth rate is not sufficient for us to sustain new population of workers. Let's find a thoughtful way to deal with this. Stop the overwhelming of the border and have an orderly process. That can be done, but it has to be done on a bipartisan basis. Some of the people involved in this process have said publicly they don't want to find a solution. They think they have too good a political issue. Well, I hope that they're wrong. I hope that we can find a solution on a bipartisan basis that serves our nation and serves the world. We need an orderly process. It took 3 to 5 years in Europe for them to come up with their own process. We need to find our own way and do it soon. I'll be ready to work with that as chairman of the Judiciary Committee and with my background on immigration issues, if there's anything I can add to the process. I hope that this week we'll receive a report from this bipartisan committee that moves us in the direction of an orderly process at our border, not being overwhelmed with numbers that are unsustainable. Madam President, I yield the floor.